Checkpoint XP on campus is back one more time. Your host Norris Howard here alongside Jacob Brothers. We're bringing in one of our good friends, Daniel Agbuya, because I had to reach out to a fellow millennial, somebody else who comes from the late 80s, early 90s, to give a little bit of context to this next story, because this was pretty big amongst us millennials, and I wanted to get the perspective of a youngster, a foundling, if you will, in the game from Jacob Brothers, and that is G4 announced that they were coming back. Well, actually, they said they, quote-unquote, never stopped playing, but if you're unfamiliar, G4 was TV for gamers. It was a cable channel, if you will. I didn't really want to call them a news network, but a channel specifically for video game content. It got really big in the early 2000s with shows like X-Play and Attack of the Show and Arena and Cheat. And so they were really all in on video game content. But it went away for a long time because all they did was play Cops and Cheaters reruns for a number of years until the channel was officially disbanded, rebranded to the Esquire Network. But I wanted to get a reaction from you guys because G4 is something that has been integral to, you know, myself in seeing how valid it was that video game content could be sent out to the masses. Daniel, I want to talk to you first. When you saw this announcement from G4, what sort of reaction did it invoke within you?
How do I submit my resume? That was my first reaction. No, I was super excited to see that come back. G4 was a big part of me realizing it's okay to be a gamer in the mainstream setting. Because look at how many people are watching this, how many this show they're producing. So when G4 kind of announced they're coming back, the first thought was like, oh, this is cool. This is for a new generation, hopefully.
Yeah, and Jacob, so you're the guy who, I mean, you were very young when G4 was in its heyday. To somebody who kind of doesn't really have the context for G4 when it was really popping off, you know, how did this feel to you?
Okay, first, let me give you a technicality, because the cutoff year for millennials was like 96, and I was born in 97, okay? So I'm not a millennial, but it's by like a year.
Millennial.
Okay, it's by like a
You're not a millennial.
I'm barely out of the cutoff, but
you're not a millennial.
Oh, I'm not. But by like a year, I'm not Cinnamon Challenge boy, okay?
Whatever.
But this was announced, right? And I saw that you, Norris, had like retweeted it or whatever, and I was like, oh, this is an old person thing, okay. And I knew like nothing. I was like, I've never heard of this in my life. Why should I care? And then when I looked it up, it was like, oh, it's like SportsCenter, but for video games, and they have different shows. And I was like, oh, this is useless. And it's like, in the era of YouTube, we don't need that anymore. Like, there are so many esports channels that will just come up out of nowhere, and they're like, here's information about the Call of Duty League, boom, 100,000 views, we go home. And now it's gonna be like, let's have a show, and we're gonna be personalities. You guys have never seen this kind of a thing before. And it's like, they don't have a brand that means anything to someone like me. So I don't really see how this is going to do well, to be honest.
See, I find that interesting because obviously they will have to make a play for Gen Z and younger to make the channel even really work. And just so we know, you know, G4 is talking about a digital play. We don't know if they're trying to be necessarily like Vin, which Vin has also said they're making some TV pushes as well. But we know that G4 will probably come back as a digital product. But even with that said, you bring up a very good point, a very interesting point, is that, you know, on YouTube, there are already many channels that are sort of personality based when it comes to gaming content. Now, I usually like to think that we here at Checkpoint have positioned ourselves as a little bit more news oriented. There are some old terrestrial and, as I like to say, dinosaur media that we sort of participate in. But we are not necessarily the ESPN, if you will, of esports, and we're not necessarily trying to be. But I think you bring up a very, very good point in the fact that how can G4 make waves in a market that has already sort of matured itself without G4?
I got one suggestion for that one. Get the big fish. Like, sign the big names. You said there's already these personalities that people are following. Well, get them on G4. that's one way to do
and
it.
avoid drama, because I know that from what I've gathered in my very limited research, it was a very drama heavy ending, or like last dance for G4 in the merger of the company. I'm forgetting the X whatever,
Especially for Adam
not
Sessler
X
and people like them. Yeah.
But I think a lot of things that I think a lot of these media outlets do, say like Giant Bomb or companies like that, is that they're also very good about streaming. And so I think in the modern era, if for G4 to do well in the modern era, I think those personalities would also have to like have a live streaming aspect. Be it if it's like, we're playing this game today, or on Tuesdays we're going to do blank for the viewers. Like, it's going to have to be much more community engaged than that like early 2000s TV mentality of, we're over here, the viewers are over there, and they're not really going to be able to talk to us. Because now we're in a very communication heavy medium.
No, I think that's a very, very poignant point. But I think, however, one thing that we're going to be able to see that I think does set the difference, and maybe this is, my millennial and old man hat, but over the past few months, we've been seeing a lot of stuff come out about gaming personalities, gaming executives, esports athletes. And a lot of it is because this industry is still very much so the wild, wild west as it pertains to structural integrity, if you will, the infrastructure, the people behind the scenes that make sure that crazy stuff doesn't happen. And I think with G4 and what a lot of, what Vin and what other companies may be thinking to bring to the space is that level of stability. And when you don't have necessarily a 22-year-old who's turned on his YouTube channel and has become more famous than he could ever imagine, or he or she, they, whatever, could ever imagine, and now has no rules, now has no limitations, now has no masters, that is not only attractive to other people, but it also breeds a really, really dangerous sort of ecosystem, if you will, within a person. And so I think with G4 and with other companies, you may be seeing a different level of professionalism that comes to the space. You may see a different level of investment that comes to the space. And really, to be perfectly honest, an air of legitimacy. Because for as much as we talk about video games and video games media and how important it is to certain people and how big it is, there is still that feeling that it is very much so a underculture. I don't want to say a counterculture, but a underculture, because too many people do it to call it a counterculture. But an underculture. Now that you're seeing that rise to the forefront, you'll also need to see people who are professionals, who have gone to school for these things, that are leading these channels. And I think that's what G4 and Vin and others can bring to the space. And maybe we can begin to see, a downturn in some of these crazy stories that we hear about gaming.
So you guys think that in 2025 G4 will still be pushing out content?
Probably no.
Yeah.
Well, the market will speak for itself. We will see when folks sort of, choose what side of the line in the sand that they're in. We'll know. But I think G4 throwing his hat or its name back in the hat is only a positive, but at the same time, seeing the reaction that Vin got from Gen Zers and the reaction that G4 got from Gen Zers, it's hard not to think that the winner of this will be the winner of everything, and that's Twitch. So, that's sort of the way I see it, and we'll see how it goes.